All right, so good afternoon, everyone, because it's afternoon in both states at the moment. Oh, can't you just feel that it's going to be over? Daylight saving almost gone. It's 2 weeks. 2 weeks. When you're on the border, when it's this difficulty, it's just annoying. Yeah. For 6 months of the year, we get to only give one time when we're going to be there. Anyway, we're in Job now. We're moving from Genesis. We've looked at prayers and the themes of prayer in Genesis over several weeks, and now this week we're looking at Job. And so I'm calling this one Inside Job, which is kind of, if you read it written, it's like inside job. An inside job. So inside Job, we're going to do 2 weeks. This week we're looking at the bulk of Job, which is up to chapter kind of 32. We're going to be looking at, everything up to chapter 32, which is when Job and his friends are speaking, just before Elihu speaks. And then next week we'll look at Elihu, and we'll look at when God speaks, when God answers Job. And God's answer is absolutely amazing. It's not an answer that, if you are familiar with how God answers, he doesn't always answer the question you're asking that you want him to answer. He's answering the question you need him to answer. And that's what Job is going to do. It can be frustrating. In fact, a lot of the answers to Job are found at the beginning, but that's the part that Job can't see. So we'll have a look at the book of Job. I want to start with a verse which tells us that Job's prayer is very important. Let's go to James chapter 5. If we go to James 5, and you'll remember this because last year we did a series on James and Galatians for those who were following along with us. James chapter 5, and if we recall James chapter 5, he's giving some examples on faithful prayers. And so he starts talking about prayer specifically, explicitly in verse 13, and he mentions Elijah there. But before he talks about Elijah, let's start with verse 10 of chapter 5. As an example of suffering and patience, brother, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of God, of the Lord, and how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Now, so that's talking about Job, and it's talking about his steadfastness, but what was he doing in his steadfastness? That's the question. In his steadfastness, he was praying, because then James immediately pivots to talking about prayer. So this tells us that prayer is what he's thinking about in terms of the steadfastness of Job. Because then he says, but above all, brothers, do not swear either by heaven, by earth, under any oath, but let your yes be yes, your no be no, so you may not fall under condemnation. Is anyone suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing praise. Is anyone among you sick? Let him call for the elders of the church. Now we can see that in the life of Job. He suffered and he was sick. And so you can see that he's pivoting from the steadfastness. How was he steadfastness? Well, he was steadfast through prayer. That's what you do when you're suffering. That's what you do when you're sick, is to pray. So let us go to the book of Job, and we're going to look at this story. Now, Job to me I always see Job as a very Shakespearean type of book. Because of the acts, it's got like several acts. You can see the acts. You've got the introduction, which is what's happening before these series of discourses. And then you have 3 acts. There's the first round of Job's friends speaking to him, and he answers each one of them. And then there's a second round where his friends speak and he answers them. And then there's the third round. It kind of goes around the circle several times. And then you've got God speaks at the end, and God comes in and he gives this resounding speech. And I've always felt that the language of Job is very poetic, like Shakespeare's. And it's interesting, I was reading something about the Hebrew of it. The Hebrew of Job's friends is very kind of, the arguments in the Hebrew are very like low level. Job's responses to them are kind of mid-level, and then God's response in the Hebrew is extremely rich and full of imagery. And so you can see that even on the literary level, it's contrasting his friends who are very low energy, low IQ, especially when it comes to spiritual things, Job, who is kind of getting a lot of it but not getting everything, and then God, who's just revealing everything. And we're going to look at that over the next little while. So if you go to Job, Job is just before Psalms, and we're going to look at Job's prayers. Now, what happens is in the introduction here is it tells us about Job, who he was. He's a man in the land of Uz. There are different ideas about where Uz was located. Some people say that it was in the Mesopotamia, near Babylon, that sort of area, near the Euphrates. Others say that it was near Damascus. And then there's others that say that Uz was near Edom. Edom is to the east, just to the east of Israel, of Canaan. Now, Israel wasn't around then. This is pre the nation of Israel. A lot of people date Job to being very, very early. In fact, a lot of people consider him to have been his book to be written by Moses. Okay, so this is the 6th book of Moses then. And so Job is living in that area, very fertile area of Edom, not the hill area of Edom, but close to Edom. And so that's what I go by, because a lot of the other names that are mentioned, the other place names that are mentioned in Job, are also place names that surrounded Israel, like Teman and other places. So he's a person of great wealth and great status in that area. But we know that he's also a person of great prayer. And we see this in verse 5, because he has 10 kids, 7 sons and 3 daughters, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And when the days of their feast had run, so these were very social children. He'd raised them to the point, I don't know about you, but siblings can often get, sometimes you can get on with your siblings, sometimes you can not get on with your siblings. These siblings seem to get on well enough to be over each other's house all the time. And so they were raised at least to cherish family. And when they would have their feasts, the more they would feast, the more Job would fast, it looks like. Job would spend time, would send and consecrate them. He would rise early in the morning, offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. And Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." So Job was a person who wasn't focused on the outward actions. He was very deeply concerned with his children. Okay, this is a person who's concerned with praying for his children to be saved. And there's the way that this book ends at the end in chapter 42, when we get to the end of Job, is absolutely amazing. So keep that in mind for next week. But it says that Job did this continually. Job was a person who prayed for his children continually. Now, then tragedy strikes, and in one day, Job loses everything. He loses his business. It starts with he loses his business. There are, and I'm not going to go into the answer here. I'm just going to talk about the business side of things. So on one day, down to verse 13, there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And there came a messenger to Job and said, so the messenger comes to Job. What is Job doing while this is going on? What is Job doing? He's probably praying, because that's what we're told that he does. When his children are feasting, he is praying for them. So when this messenger comes, when these series of messengers come, Job has just been in prayer. Keep that in mind. So the messenger says the oxen were ploughing and the donkeys feeding beside them. Now he had 500 oxen and 500 donkeys. Okay, and they were ploughing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you. Okay, so he's just lost all of his domestic cattle and everything like that. Then you had another servant that came up, and he was one of the shepherds who was tending to the sheep. Now, Job had 7,000 sheep. That makes him quite wealthy in this area. And fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep, and the servants and consumed them. I alone have escaped to tell you. While he's still speaking, there came another one who said the Chaldeans formed 3 groups, made a raid on the camels, and took and struck them. Now, he had 3,000 camels. Now, camels were more involved in your your far distant trade. Camels were what he would have used to trade in terms of far distance, so he's got his domestic and then his international trade has all dried up. He had domestic and international business all gone in one day. Now we've seen sort of things like that. We're seeing banks closing down. We're seeing people losing everything. We've seen that in 2008. We saw that with the global financial crisis. We're about to see a lot more of that pain. And so Job is someone who knows what that is. Now, it's tough to lose money. Has anyone lost money big time? Yeah, like lost big, made a bet on something, stocks or whatever. Bought real estate that crumbled or bought into some sort of a business that went bust. This is what Job is experiencing to the extreme. But it gets worse, because while that's happening, another servant comes and says, "Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking in their oldest brother's house. Behold, a great wind came across, so a tornado came, struck the four corners of the house. It fell on the young people, they're all dead. I alone have escaped to tell you." Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, fell on the ground and worshipped. He said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Now, in this, you can see some of the way that the people there are dealing with tragedy. They come and one of them says, "Fire from God fell from heaven." They are already attributing this to God. This is the servants. They are attributing, "God has done this to you, Job." That's what they are saying. Now, was it from God? Well, let's skip to the next thing that happens to Job a little bit later. Okay, so we'll see what happened before this. So there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before Yahweh, before God, and Satan came among them. Yahweh said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan said to the Lord, to Yahweh, "I've been going back and forth on the earth, walking up and down on it." And Yahweh said to Satan, "Have you looked at my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." Satan answered Yahweh and said, "Well, does he fear you for no reason? You've put a head around him and his household and protected him. Of course he's going to love you. He's going to love you because you bless him." That's what Satan's saying. He says, "You bless the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But if you were to stretch out your hand," so this is Satan saying to God, "If you were to stretch out your hand, God, Yahweh, and touch all that he has, he will curse you to your face." Yahweh said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand." So God doesn't say, "I'm going to do it. Fine, I'll do what you..." God doesn't respond to Satan's challenge by saying, "Yes, I will strike Job down." He says, "Okay, I will withdraw the hedge of protection. Act as you will, Satan. You can test." Is God testing Job? Who's testing Job here? Who's the one who then goes out? It says Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So when it says fire, when the servant says fire came down from God out of heaven, did the fire come down from God? God never says that he was going to strike down Job. When these things happened, these weren't the result of the actions of God. They were the result of the actions of Satan. After he's lost his business, his children, everything, he's only got his wife left. And that's not a great consolation, as you'll see in a moment. Then there's another day when the sons of God, that's the angels, the angelic beings, are coming before God and presenting themselves to Yahweh. Satan comes back again, and the same, "Where have you come from, Satan?" Back and forth on the earth. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without a reason." One thing I love about this is that God is bragging to his enemy about his friends. If you are faithful with God, if you are friends with God, if you are letting Jesus live in you and shape you and change your life, God brags about you to his enemy. God throws you in the face of his enemy. Isn't that amazing? Can we do that? Can we throw ourselves in the face of our enemy? No. And we'll see that as part of the lesson of Job. You don't brag about yourself, but God brags about you. God brags about your triumphs. And that's what we see here. And Satan says, well, skin for skin, all that a man has he'll give for his own life. Stretch your hand out and touch his bone and his flesh, and he'll curse you to your face. And Yahweh said to Satan, behold, he's in your hand, just spare his life. Do what you want to his body, is what he says. It's noticed that Satan doesn't take away his wife. We'll see why he doesn't do that. His wife is actually someone who helps Satan in this. So Satan went out from the presence of Yahweh, struck Job with loathsome sores. Now we see, this is very explicit, it's Satan who does this. God doesn't strike him with sores, Satan does. Now, we know this. This is an example where we, the audience, are able to see something that the character in the story is not able to see and live. We are the ones who are given this window into what's happening in heaven, and so God says you can go. Satan goes out and does it. So Job is struck down with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. He took a piece of broken pottery. Has anyone had a boil? Has anyone had a pimple? Imagine that everywhere, painful, to the point where he can't sit down. He's got a piece of broken pot. You can imagine that broken pottery is all he's got. Everything's just been decimated, and he's just got broken pottery. So he uses this broken pottery and scrapes himself while he sits in the ashes. His wife comes to him and says, do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die. Now, we can be hard on Mrs. Job. We can be pretty hard on Mrs. Job, but what's she going through? They are going through intense grief. They are going through intense grief to the point where they've lost all their kids. They've lost their business, their status, their wealth, everything that made them, that crafted their identity as parents, as business people, as the elite of the area. And so she is saying, just be done with this. Why are you even holding fast? So in her mind, this is grief speaking. Mrs. Job is not a bad person. She's a person who's had bad things happen to her. So I don't want to be too hard on Mrs. Job, but God is, she is not speaking for God here. She is speaking for Satan, because she's taken she swallowed what the servants have swallowed, that this is God that's done these things to you. Why don't you curse the God who's done this to you? That's what she's saying. Curse God and die. Just curse God and be done with it. But Job says to her, you speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, God did not sin with his lips. So I take these as two prayers that Job is speaking. After he loses his kids and everything, he says, God gives, God takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He's actually praying to God. He's worshipping God and saying, God, you gave it all. You've taken it away. I'm going to bless you. Okay? I'm going to bless you regardless. And then the second time he says, well, why should I only bless God in the good? Why should I only bless God when good things are happening? Now it takes a little while, but he doesn't stay in that place. Has anyone been in a good place? You feel like it's right, and then over time you kind of lose that. Job kind of loses that, because then he has 3 friends that come. They heard about everything that had happened. Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. They come and they sit with him for 7 days saying nothing. They're just sitting for 7 days, all of them thinking, just comforting. They're there to comfort him, but they're not great comforters, as we will see. They've come there because they feel like they need to have a bit of an intervention for Job. Okay, they have to have a bit of an intervention. These guys are bad friends. They have good intentions, but they're not people who have an insight into God. And so they have this. So they're in this place, and they're just looking. They're just being there for their friend. Probably not too close, because he's got these sores all over him. They don't want to get too close, but they're just sitting there. Have you ever sat with someone without saying anything? Sometimes you just need to be there, be present. They were better friends when they were keeping their mouths closed than when they started opening their mouths. They had this idea that we'll see, and we'll see that this is the character of these 3 guys. Eliphaz, he's the guy with the eloquent philosophy. He's the one who speaks up here about philosophy, about good and evil, and why good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, and he's speaking theoretically. He's speaking of he's more operating on the thing of if good things are happening to you, you must be righteous. But if bad things are happening to you, you must be unrighteous. He's not saying, therefore, Job, you're unrighteous. No, he leaves that to his friend. His friend, Bildad, he's more of the, just tell it as it is. Job, hear what Eliphaz said? That means you have sinned. Come on, fess up. Tell us your sin. Tell us your sin. So Bildad's talks are more of the, come on, tell us. Just confess, and this can all go. And then the third friend, Zophar, he knowing that Job hasn't confessed, his speeches tend to be like, this is what's going to be in store for the wicked. This is what happens to the wicked. And he focuses on this idea of a punishment, a vengeful punishment. Now, these three guys have a very skewed view of God. They view God in the sense of, if good things are happening to you, then you must have pleased God. If bad things are happening to you, you must have displeased God. What they're doing is they're seeing the whole world in a black and white where only God has any power to do anything. They're seeing where God is, we believe God is sovereign, but we see that there's a bit more complexity. And in fact, we know from the beginning, from the insight into what's happened in heaven, that there is more going on in this picture. What is going on? God is sovereign, but there's also another player at work. And this world is not the end world that we're going to be in. And that's going to be a big theme as we get to next week. But these guys, this is their mind, their worldview is that, if you do the right thing, good things happen. If you do the wrong thing, that's very legalistic, isn't it? That's a very, very legalistic view. Do good things happen to bad people? Yes. Do bad things happen to good people? All the time. All the time. Okay? Because, every good person dies at some point, don't they? That's a bad thing that happens to good people. Now, when I say good, I'm talking about followers of Jesus, people who are covered by the blood, who do amazing works of charity and generosity. These are people who suffer bad things as well. We just talked about the hymn, It Is Well, and that was a person who was a believer who lost everything. Okay, that was a Job. That was a modern, more modern day Job. So Job starts praying. I think that this is prayer. In chapter 3, he laments his birth. He's been told by his wife, curse God and die. He doesn't, but he still does curse something. What does he curse? He curses the day he was born. He says, let it be stricken from history. Let's have a read of some of what he's saying. Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that is said a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. He's actually saying, I wish, verse 11, why did I not die at birth, come out of my womb, of my mother's womb, and expire? Why did the knees receive me, or why the breast that I should nurse? He's saying, I wish that I didn't even exist. Has anyone felt that way? I've felt deep depression in my life. And I know what this is. I know these sorts of thoughts. Maybe not to the extent that Job is feeling it, but I know what that is. He can't move without hurting. He can't look around without looking at what he's lost. Even his wife is lost to him because she's not standing by his side and grieving with him. She's grieving in her own way. So he is extremely feeling alone, isn't he? He's got 3 friends there, but they've said nothing to him. They haven't come and said anything encouraging, and everything they're going to say is going to be discouraging. They come in with a bit of an agenda to sort him out. They're going to kick him while he's down. Has anyone been kicked while you're down? When bad things have happened and someone's come along and said, well, this is why. I know someone who sadly lost a child who they had to terminate a pregnancy because the child had a heart that wasn't working. And I was told about someone berated the person on the phone for an hour and a half, saying, you did the wrong thing by aborting this child that would never live. And even though the child was poisoning the mother and everything like that, that's kicking someone while they're down. That's kicking someone. Now, I'm against abortion, but that's not a viable baby. That's not a baby that's going to live. That's a baby that will live in the kingdom, but that's not a baby that was ever going to live here. And so that's a really cruel thing to do. These guys were being cruel in this instance, kicking someone while they were down. And so then we have a series of discussions. So Job is lamenting the day that he's born. he's talking about the suffering, and he just wishes he could escape it. He wishes, if he wasn't born, I would never be going through this. He's forgetting all of the good things that can happen. That's someone's phone, is that? So have you ever felt like, something tragedy that happens undoes all the good things that happened before that? That's okay. Has anyone had tragedy that's undone all the good they've experienced? Has undone all the good. He's had years of being wealthy, of having 10 kids, of having a great life, but this tragedy has just wiped all of that. Wiped all of that. He can't even remember the good times. He's like, I wish that I just wasn't born. And so that's what he's going through now. When he's saying, I curse the day that I was born, when he's saying, I curse the day that I was born, he's actually cursing God. Indirectly. Why? How are you cursing God by cursing the day you were born?
Because
God intended him. You can't curse the day you were born without cursing the Creator who intended you to be born. So there is that indirectness there. He doesn't see that, and there's a lot that Job is not seeing as he's looking at this. So then Eliphaz has his first speech where he suggests that suffering is a result of sin. This is the indirect person. And Job responds to Eliphaz by saying that his suffering is undeserved. Let's have a look at some of what Job says, because it's kind of a prayer. It's kind of prayer-like. Job says, "Oh, that I might have my request that God would fulfill my hope, that it would please God to crush me, that he would let loose his hand and cut me off. This would be my comfort. I would even exult in pain unsparing, for I have not denied the words of the Holy One. What is my strength that I should wait, and what is my end that I should be patient?" What is Job doing here? He's saying, God, I wish you'd just kill me now. Just kill me and let it be done with. I have not failed you. When bad things happen, we can do one of two things. We can do the pity party. Now, Job has been brought into this pity party. He's saying, look at my life, God. Look at my life and what I have done for you. Do you think that's a winning argument with God? But do you think God listens to it? Do you think God cares about it? I think God listens to it because God doesn't have as much problem with Job. He does have a problem with Job. We'll see that next week. But Job is still being raw and authentic with God. He's saying, God, I've tried so hard. Why? Why is this happening to me? That is a very rational thing to think when you're going through this, because we don't have all of the knowledge. We don't see the bigger picture. One of the things about Job and the structure of it is we're told the bigger picture at the beginning, Job is not. We're told what's going on in heaven, Job is not. And so from his limited worldview, I was praying every day. I was offering sacrifices for my kids. I was worried about this, and I was making sure I was doing the right things, and this still happened. How is this possible? And God is like, just wait for it, just wait for it. So he's presenting his own righteousness. Then Bildad gets in and he suggests that Job's children may have sinned. So it's maybe not your sin, Job, maybe it's your children's sin, that's why they have died. And Job acknowledges God's power, and chapter 10 is amazing because he pleads to God. He's continuing to say, I loathe my life, I give free utterance to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not condemn me, let me know why you contend against me. Does it seem good to you to oppress? Now Job is also seeing, he's bought into this by now, this idea that maybe God is behind this. Are you the one behind this, God? So Job is very inconstant in the book, in these speeches. One minute he's like, woe is me. The next minute he's like, I have a redeemer. We'll see that in a minute. The one minute he's saying, this, I don't deserve this. The next minute is like, God, what are you trying to do? It's all over the place. He's got hope, but he's mingled with doubt. That is extremely human. That is extremely human. I love Job for that. I love that because I'm not constant. I can have inconstancy. I can be 1 minute this and then the next minute that. That's the human condition. And Job is very real in this prayer, in this suffering. especially when we're seeing bad things happen. Why is this? What have I done? Have I done this? What are you doing, God? Why aren't you blessing me? These are the questions that we can have because we don't have the bigger picture. And so you read through chapter 10 and you see, why did you bring me out of my womb? He's asking, are not my days few? Cease and leave me alone that I might find a little cheer before I go to the grave. He's saying, just, God, please leave me alone if this is you. I've felt that sort of thing. I remember one extreme experience where I was lying in bed and I felt the presence of God. This was when I was in deep depression. And I actually woke up and I saw a light on this side. I was facing the wall. I was in the Navy. I was in the Army barracks at Inogra, and I'm facing the wall here, and I see this light on the other side. I've woken up at night, and God, I just feel like I'm this presence of God. I'm like, go away. That's kind of the feeling. I'm like, I don't need this, God. I don't need this right now. And I just said to him, God, what do you want from me? I said that out loud, and I heard the voice say, I just want you to have peace. And that to me was what I needed. Like that was a reversal of what I understood about God at that time. I'm like, God, you're just going to come and do something else to me. What else have you got for me? What other burden have you got to put on me? And that was my depression speaking. And when God said, I want you to have peace, I did feel peace. And that was the beginning of this peace that I had. But I understand what Job's saying. Like, why can't you just leave me alone? That's a really human thing. Do you know that it's okay for you to take your honest feelings to God? That's another lesson in Job. Take your honest feelings to God. Take your doubts. Take your questions about the bigger picture. He might not answer it. Yeah, go.
When God spoke to you, did you actually hear the voice?
Yes, it was audible for me. It was the one time that I've heard an audible, really audible voice from God. Okay, and then there's Zophar has a speech, and he claims that Job's suffering must be a result of hidden sins and connects suffering and sin. Job responds to Zophar in chapters 12 to 14, and he criticises his friends for their lack of empathy to begin with, while continuing to reaffirm his innocence. Job just keeps pointing to his own, I did nothing wrong, I did nothing wrong. And then Eliphaz comes in again and he says, Job, you're arrogant. That's what the problem is. You're saying that you're innocent, but you can't be innocent because otherwise you wouldn't be going through this. So you're an arrogant person, and your sin is a result of your suffering is a result of your sin. Okay. Job then responds, maintaining his innocence again, and he laments that his friends are unsupportive. So if you have a look at Job 16 verse 19, we see something very interesting. Job 16 verse 19. This is the begin. Like it's like the more Job is speaking and being like pouring himself out, the more he's clarifying towards a certain direction. Have you ever? Who thinks by speaking? I think by speaking. The more I speak, the more my thoughts get clear. That's how I think. I speak first. Speak first and think about it later. Is what I often get accused of. I can. Yeah, I only open my mouth to change feet sometimes, but Job is thinking as he's speaking. The more he speaks, the more... Who's said something out loud and just thought to yourself, that was stupid? That just doesn't make any sense. It made sense here. It made sense here, but as soon as it came out, it's like, well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever said. That's where Job, I think, is going with this. The more he's speaking, the more he's realizing, oh man, I'm being stupid. And you can see that because in Job 16 verse 19, he says, even now, behold, my witness is in heaven. He who testifies for me is on high. My friends scorn me. My eye pours out tears to God, that he would argue the case of a man with God as a son does with his neighbour. Job is starting to remember stuff that he knows about God. What's he remembering? That he has an advocate in heaven. He has someone who is in heaven. Who's that advocate? That's the angel of Yahweh. That's Jesus. That's Jesus, who we know is Jesus. That's the Christ. So Christ, he's like, oh yeah, I have a witness in heaven. He's trying to defend himself, and he's realizing how stupid it sounds to these other guys. They just keep claiming he's arrogant. He's like, oh yeah, I have a witness in heaven. I have a witness in heaven who will testify for me. And he's starting to gravitate towards that. Then Bildad, emphasizes the fate of the wicked, implying that Job's suffering is a result of his own wrongdoing once again. And he responds to Bildad in chapter 19. And there's something else very interesting here. So he says in verse 23, "Oh, that my words were written, oh, that they were inscribed in a book." Done, thanks to Moses or whoever wrote Job. So that was a prayer that was answered for Job. "Oh, that with an iron pen and lead they were engraved in the rock forever. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. After my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. My heart faints within me." What's he doing here? He's again casting his eyes slowly upwards. It's taking a while because the suffering can ground you. It can, you're grounded. You're like flawed. You're flawed by what's going on, and so you're feeling the pain. It's like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Has anyone heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs? You can't, if someone is worried about basic things like how to provide food for their family and shelter, you can't have a philosophical discussion with them about the fate of their soul, their eternal soul. If they can't eat today, if their primary question is, where am I going to eat? Where am I going to sleep? What am I going to do today? They don't care about eternity. They're not going to be thinking about eternity in that moment because that's not where they're at. And Job, he's been thinking about, how am I going to get this sores off me? What am I going to do? His eyes have been taken off of God. God is still at the back of his mind, but he's starting, as he's speaking these things through, because he's arguing with God, and as he's arguing with God, he's remembering things about God, that God is his Redeemer, that God is his witness, and that's what leads us to the point where God comes in and answers. Okay, and that's next week. So then Zophar, after this, Job argues that the wicked often prosper, contradicting the idea of suffering. So it gets back to the nitty-gritty of suffering and sin. In chapters 23 and 24, he's responding to Eliphaz's third speech, where Eliphaz is now accusing Job of specific sins, and Job expresses his longing to present his case before God. Now he's starting to say, God, I want you to show up. I want you to show up in this, because I need you to defend me. I need you to explain yourself. That's where he's moving to. He's moving to the point of, I have a Redeemer, I have a witness in heaven, I need him to show up in this situation. I'm just getting oppressed by these so-called comforters. These are false comforters. They've come in, and God will show up. That's the thing, and that tells us that God will show up for all of us as well at some point in the future. Job 23, verse 4 to 10. Have a look over there. Job 23. We're just looking at some of these things that are prayer-like in what Job is saying. Job says, I would lay my case before him, before God, and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know what he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in his greatness of power? No, he would pay attention to me. There an upright man could argue with him, and I would be acquitted forever by my judge. Behold, I go forward, but he is not there, and backward, but I do not perceive him. On the left hand, when he is working, I do not behold him. He turns to the right hand, but I do not see him. He knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I shall come out as gold. Job is starting to sense a little bit more about what's going on, and saying, God, turn up, because I know that when you're in charge, when you're here, I can ask you my questions and they will be answered. You're the only one I can get the answers from. He's tried to look within. He's looked within, hasn't he? He's like, my righteousness doesn't answer this. Our righteousness doesn't answer suffering. Our righteousness cannot answer suffering. We have to have a Redeemer who answers the suffering. We have to have a witness in heaven who answers the suffering. We have to have one who contends with us. And I love these stories of the Bible, these prayers. We've seen it in Abraham. We're going to see it we've seen it in Jacob. Jacob wrestled with God. God allows us to wrestle with him. Abraham debated with God. He whittled him down to 10 people. He negotiated with God. We have a God who will allow us to negotiate with him, who will want us to wrestle with him, who will meet us and direct our paths, like with Joseph, as we saw last week. We have a God who we can argue with, like Job did. Job saying, I'll bring my arguments. God's like, fine, come let us reason together, as Isaiah says. I love a God that is that real. He's not a God who's so far distant that he doesn't have interest in our day-to-day lives, who set this ball running and spinning and then left. Yeah, it'll take care of itself. We don't have a God who's far removed from the course. He counts the hairs on our heads, the Bible says. More than that, he probably knows the electrons in your body. He knows the number of electrons and atoms that make you up. Because one day he's going to bring them all back together to give you a new body, like a glorified body. He knows who you are. And so after this, Bildad has another speech. This is the last of the friends to speak. And he emphasizes the human insignificance compared to God's greatness. I just want to put a word of caution when you read Job. There are verses in Job that are often quoted by people, well-meaning, about God. There are verses in Job that people quote about to make an argument that God is like this, God is like that. There's a verse in Job that says, can you by searching find out God? Job didn't say that. That was one of the friends. Now, the Bible does say that you can seek, if you seek, you will find me, if you search for me with all your heart. So when the friend is saying, can you by searching find out God, with the implied answer of no, that is ridiculous. That is not a proof text. That is not a text you should be using to prove anything about God. If you seek me, you will find... That's God speaking. So Job's friends don't understand who God is. They are very dim-witted when it comes... They're full of philosophy, but they're foolish in their philosophy. And so we see Job's final response here to what Bildad is saying. Now, are we insignificant? Yeah, in comparison to God's greatness. But God's greatness has invested significance in us. God has said, there is an insignificance. If you compare just created to creator, there's insignificance. But if the creator invests significance in the created, then there is significance. And that's what these guys don't get. And so in chapter 26 to 31, Job has his final speech. And he gets to this point in the middle of this speech in chapter 28. He's saying, where is wisdom? He's just heard a lot of foolishness from his friends. He's heard a lot of foolishness from people who don't really understand God, who don't understand what God is like. And so he says, where is wisdom? Where shall wisdom be found? And where is the place of understanding? Verse 12. Man does not know its worth, and it is not found in the land of the living. The deep says it is not in me. The sea says it is not with me. He is looking for wisdom because he knows wisdom is a person. Wisdom is a person. In the Old Testament, we're revealed this person called wisdom in the book of Proverbs, chapter 8, who is Jesus. This is the same person he is crying out for, who is the one who witnesses to him from heaven, who is the one who is the Redeemer that lives and will stand at the last day. He is starting to focus his eyes on this person. He's calling God out by saying, come and reveal yourself to me in the midst of my suffering. Reveal what all of this is about. He hasn't cursed God. He's cursed the day that he was created. He's cursed all of those things, but he hasn't cursed God directly because he knows that there must be an answer. Have you ever been through stuff where your world doesn't make sense? That's what Job is going through. He's like, I know the theory here, but my experience is not matching up with my theory, so I must need a bigger picture. God, come and give me a bigger picture. And next week we will look at that, and God comes and gives him the biggest picture. You can't get a bigger picture than what God is about to give to Job. Job then in chapter 29 gives a summary of his defense. He continues to present his own righteousness as if that is something that God is going to be listening to. You can look at God just going, these guys are just useless, these friends of yours, but Job, there's a few things we need to correct. And you're not going to make any case to me when you're presenting your own righteousness before me. Your righteousness, yep, you are a blameless person. I was able to brag about you, but it doesn't sound good when you're bragging about yourself, Job. Okay? When other people, when Alina brags about me, it's okay. When I go and then say the same things that she's just bragged about me, I look like an arrogant fool. Okay? It's just how it works. So God, who bragged about Job, is kind of going, it's cringe when you say it. And that's where it's at. So Job he finishes with his final appeal. We get down to chapter 30, which is where he is making that appeal. And in 30, he says in verse 19 to 26, God has cast me into the mire. I have become like dust and ashes. I cry to you for help, and you do not answer me. I stand, and you only look at me. You have turned cruel to me. With the might of your hand, you persecute me. You lift me up on the wind. You make me ride on it, and you toss me about in the roar of the storm. For I know that you will bring me to death, to the house appointed for all living. Yet does not one in a heap of ruin stretch out his hand, and in his distress cry for help? Did I not weep for him whose day was hard? Was not my soul grieved for the needy? But when I hoped for good, evil came, and when I waited for light, darkness came. So Job is being just raw about this fact that he had compassion on those who are going through what he's going through. And where is the compassion, God? Where is I see your greatness, but where is your mercy? Where is your compassion? And that is okay to have those questions. It is okay to wait years, I would say, for an answer to those questions. But thankfully, Job doesn't have to wait years. God shows up next week, and it's amazing. I'm just going to give you one little taste. It's one of my favourite verses. It's in Job, because it's just so funny. God shows up and he says in verse 2 of chapter 38, who is this that I'll say it how I hear it in my head. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Man, that's a rebuke. That's like just listening to those words. Who is this that darkens counsel? Who is this that makes knowledge stupid? Who are these stupid ants? God is saying, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? He's saying you have no idea what you're speaking about. And I don't think he's saying it in a condemnatory manner. He's just saying, you guys need to check yourselves. Okay, you need to check yourselves and that's including Job. That's including Job. They all have varying degrees of lack of understanding of who God is. And God shows up and he's going to tell them who he is. But the theme of this up until now, and the key to take with you is, whatever you're going through, take it to God. If you doubt God, take it to God. If you question God, take it to God. If you're suffering and if you blame God, take it to God. Because God shows up at the end of that. Now, it might not be straight away. It might be you need to read some Bible and you'll get the answers in that. It might be someone comes and tells you something that's a word from the Lord. He might speak to you directly. But take it to God. When I was lying down and I was saying, God, just go away. What do you want from me? I took it to God. When you don't want to follow God, take it to God. Take it to God. That's the point. And Job is doing that here in this, I find it fascinating that he's got such a habit of prayer developed over years and years of praying for his kids. And I can't wait to share that insight next week about the way that God honours that at the end of all of this. But all of those years of praying for his kids, he's now, even when he's debating with his friends, he segues into talking to God. He's like, you guys are not getting it, I'll talk to God in the middle of this. He's having a conversational prayer, where he's talking to his friends but then talking to God in the middle of it. That's what we can do. Talk to God in the middle of what we're going through. And that's what it is to be inside Job, to be inside his mindset. As we look at him, he was steadfast, but he was steadfast because he prayed. He kept taking it to God. And I challenge you to do the same. Let's do that right now. Father, there is a lot of suffering to come on this world, and there is a lot of suffering on this world. We know that it's going to get darker before the dawn. And Father, this is a very important lesson for us to learn as we think about what's coming. Whether it's financial disasters and distress, whether it's calamities. We know that the end times are going to bring disaster that will affect everyone. Now, not the last plagues, but the time of trouble that comes before that. There's going to be people martyred. There's going to be people who are, go through a lot of affliction, and that will include people who you will prepare for that. Father, we know the bigger picture more than Job did, but when we're in the middle of the pain and the suffering, sometimes we can take our eyes off those things. Help us to remember that you show up. That is the answer. That's the answer to this whole history of this wretched world. You will show up, and you will show up in our suffering and in answer to our suffering. We just need to persevere, be patient, and bring ourselves to you, our whole selves, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so, Father, we want to give that to you. We want to take it to you. We surrender all that we are, and we just ask that you fashion us. And that, as Job said, like on that last day, we will be refined like gold, because those fires that press in upon us and that burn us, they're also the fires that purify us. And so, Father, as we reflect over this, let us be like Job. Let us walk like Job through this world, and let us comfort people with that knowledge that you show up. And next week we can't wait to look into that. We thank you in Jesus' name, and Father, also bless the food we're about to eat. Amen.